According to the incoming CEO of FirstRand, Mary Vilakazi, South Africa might not secure a quick exit from the global financial watchdog's dirty money list by the year 2025 because its reforms are moving too slowly. Now, she stated that at the pace that South Africa is going, it is unlikely that the country will be able to get off the grey list come review time in 2025. Vilakazi added that unless it is declared a priority and there is proper political will like that shown in countries like Botswana and Mauritius, South Africa will not be able to meet the 2025 deadline. Now, joining me for this conversation this morning from Paris, France, I have Esteban Guidici, is the Senior Policy Advisor, Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade. It's nice, Esteban, to have you join us on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Good morning to you and to your audience. This is a very complicated, intricate, though interesting matter. Let's see. I'm interested. I want to have this discussion. I'm not sure if I'm going to have all the answers, but I'm hoping to give you just an understanding of how things can be done and what are the prospects for South Africa.
Truly. Now, do you actually agree with the assertion by the incoming CEO of FirstRand, that is Mary Vilakazi, that South Africa is moving at a slow pace and as a result, it might not be able to secure a quick exit from that watchdog's grey list by the year 2025?
Well, I partially agree with that statement in the sense that it's difficult to get out of the grey list because of the standards that South Africa needs to achieve. I remember that a couple of months ago, we already discussed this matter in relation to a report that we have released on illicit trade, and we saw that the recommendations that South Africa needs to put in place to fulfill the requirements of the Financial Action Task Force are mostly related to the effectiveness of the system, meaning effective implementation. And these are standards that they are quite difficult to achieve, not only for South Africa, but for whichever country who is subject to that. But we need to put this into context. In your introduction, you mentioned Botswana and Mauritius, but these are different countries. The reality in South Africa is quite complex. So I would say that, yeah, it's difficult to get there, though not impossible. And well, I wouldn't go that far and be as strong as the CEO of this corporation, of this bank, but I understand that it's important. I mean, it gives a feeling of what's the situation, what this important person has said. So, yeah, it's to be taken into consideration.
Esteban, looking at the allegations leveled against South Africa by FATF, it has to do with deficiencies in tackling illicit financial flows and terrorism financing. Now, you have said that there are complexities, and these complexities are peculiar to South Africa. So I'd like you to help us break it down. What are really the challenges to the implementation of reforms that could help South Africa deal with these allegations or issues, as the case is?
Yeah, I think that, well, I can make a parallel, for instance, with the first case of Mauritius. This country went out of the grey list because mostly what they had to do related to the robustness of the system, which is basically modifying the applicable laws. But when we come to South Africa has strong regulations against money laundering and financing of terrorism that comply with the FATF standards. But the problem that what we are seeing here and the action plan that South Africa has with the FATF that was agreed in February of this year, 2023, mostly relate to matters that are very practical. For instance, just to give you a picture of what needs to be done, they need to increase the outbound of mutual legal assistance requests to facilitate countering money laundering and terrorist financing. What does this mean? I mean, just put it in very simple words. It means that the judicial authorities, the investigators, they are going to make more requests of assistance to other jurisdictions to tackle this problem, because this is an international problem, a transnational problem. But let's be honest, I mean, this is also related to asset recovery, and this is something that the whole world is grappling with. Another thing that they need to improve if the risk-based supervision of designated non-financial business and professions, like can be lawyers. I mean, this needs to be effectively implementing when they conduct business, that we can make sure that there are no risks of money laundering. Again, this is not only changing laws, this is having effective application of things. And this brings me a little bit back to the first question. I mean, there are many things, some information that it's not publicly available because many of them are related to ongoing investigations. Yeah, probably there is a big chance that the South African authorities are going in this direction, but well, we need to see more. We need to see the outcome. I don't want to give a bad picture of it because I'm not certain about it. But what I can tell you is I just gave you two examples. Another example that I can give you to elaborate is the need to share financial intelligence information with the financial intelligence units between different agencies. This is something that we have recommended in relation to fighting illicit trade and illicit flows, and it's something that the FATF recommends too. And it's something that requires lots of work. It requires new capabilities. It requires also new technologies because criminals, they are becoming smarter and smarter. And this brings me, for instance, with everything that has to do with virtual assets and their use for money laundering. And these are things that need to be tackled. I mean, you need a whole change in the tradition and the work and how it's being done. Well, this is why we see that it's difficult and these things need to be looked at. But I know that the National Treasury of South Africa is doing engagement with several stakeholders, including central banks and regulators, to implement these necessary changes. But you see, I'm just telling you, there are so many stakeholders with new things that need to be done that turns this problematic highly complex. I mean, it's not something that should be a matter of naming and shaming. We need to be all together on this and help South Africa to find the light at the end of the tunnel.
Esteban, we are going to do a little bit of evaluation, but then, of course, okay, let me just do it now. Now, let's do a bit of evaluation. Between February and now, how did the FATF's decision impact South Africa's credit ratings and the economy? Because some people have said that it really did not have any deep-looking, sitting impact on the country's credit ratings and the economy. And I'd like to find out from you how it has impacted the country in those regards, and what may likely follow if the country fails to get off the grey list by the year 2025.
Okay, that's a very good question. It's a very difficult one. In everything that has to do with the economy, the time, it's God who decides, and we cannot give an accurate estimation of how things are going to be or when they are going to be. What I can tell you is that from a market and economic impact perspective, it is difficult to forecast the effect in South Africa, because there is a lack of historic precedent from grey listing on emerging markets like South Africa, which is part of the BRICS. Having said that, it's interesting to see, for instance, some estimations from the International Monetary Fund, which says that FATF countries who are subject to the grey list of the FATF have suffered in the past an average of net loss of 7.6% of the capital inflow across the borders. So it's something that is likely to happen in South Africa, but it cannot be confirmed. And please allow me, this needs to be put in context with the current reality, which is quite different with what happened a few years ago. I mean, we all know all the turmoil that the whole world is going through. So it's difficult to have an accurate estimation. But what I can tell you for sure, we trace it with the Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade. We have produced a very, to my understanding, eloquent report on the relation between credit ratings and illicit trade. And it shows cases how financial crime, which is the crimes that the FATF, it's under the purview of this organization, it shows how this undermines the credit ratings of the countries. And it's likely that there is going to be, a problem in the future, and that the economic prospects of South Africa would improve if the country is gotten out from the grey listing. Why? Because when you see the credit ratings of countries, what do you look at? You look at the institutional framework, you look at the political stability, you look at their financial strength, the governance, the effectiveness of their laws. So yes, if the country gets out of the gray list, for sure this is going to improve the economic prospects of the country. But as I said before, in these kind of matters, it's difficult to know when this is going to have an impact. Let me make an analogy to wrap up the question. For instance, if you print a lot of money, the effects of that from a country in terms of inflation sometimes takes even 24 months to be seen in the economy. Likewise, this kind of decisions from a regional body, it also has to do with the business opportunities, with the risk that the investors may want to take. But what is for sure is that if we ensure to have a strong institution in the country, and this means comply with the standards of FATF, the economic prospects are for sure going to be better.
Esteban, now, well said. Now, I'd like to look at the issues of South Africa being included in the grey list. Of course, earlier on, you talked about the fact that the country needs to begin to share information with investigators. And of course, that would help in dealing with issues of money laundering and terrorism financing, which is very important. And you also said it's not an issue of naming or shaming. So I'd like to just tie that to the issue of the country being included in the grey list, which was said to have followed an era of endemic government corruption, referred to locally in the country as state capture, that had to do with former president, actually, Jacob Zuma. Now, his successor, which is the current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, estimated that graft cost the economy at least about 500 billion rand. That's about $25.6 billion. So in light with your earlier summation, how true is this? Because I know that the South African Reserve Bank was accused of covering up a part of these issues as it relates to the former president and the current president. I'll bring up the issue with the current president with you after this question. But then I'd like to just quickly, in about a minute, find out from you, how true is that allegation?
Well, as you know, I'm a specialist in international law, policy and financial crimes. Here we are in a political situation that is very difficult. But what I can tell you is that everything that is related to the Financial Action Task Force, it's purely technical. So these political allegations, the impact that they are going to have, if I have to tell you as a specialist under my domain, we should not listen to them. We should go straight to the recommendations and to the standards that they need to be followed. There are specific indicators. It's very complex, and they can be assessed in an objective manner. Now, it's true that all matters related to, with corruption, they directly impact on that. But I wouldn't feel comfortable in talking about the specific politics because it's not my expertise. I'm purely technical on these matters of the FATF and how the things should be done to comply with. And I understand that the current government is doing their best to improve these indicators. That's the best answer that I can give you to that question.
Esteban, of course, I understand the case. Of course, we know that these are attendant issues, and one of the reasons why the FATF had to include South Africa in the grey list, which had to do with the issue of corruption. Now, this is what we're going to do, Esteban. Just stay with us for a while. We'll go on a short break, and when we return, we'll continue with the discussion. South Africa has until the year 2025 a deadline to get off the FATF's grey list. And of course, it's been said that there are attendant effects if it fails to exact reforms that will help it deal with the issue of money laundering and terrorism financing in the country as it affects its image at the global stage. And we have been talking to Esteban Guidici, who is the Senior Policy Advisor, Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade. Esteban, thank you so much for staying with us. Even as we continue with the conversation, I'd like to look at the area of the investments that should come in or that has been coming into the country. Now, from what you have observed, are investors really bothered about South Africa being on the grey list? Do you see capital and currency outflows happening if South Africa misses the 2025 deadline?
A few just before the pause. I think that it's too soon to see the impacts in terms of the market and economic impact since this happened in February 2023. Having said that, we expect that this is going to be the case because of the estimations that I talked about the International Monetary Fund. In general, 7.6% of the capital inflows across the borders relative to gross domestic product, they are lost when a country is grade listed. And this has a lot to do because there is a problem in terms of the reputation, there is less investment in the country, and clearly the cross-border transactions become more difficult. And this is something that is somehow objective because banks in foreign countries, when another country is grade listed under the FATF, they need to take more cautious with those countries. Take the case, for instance, of Mauritius. Now it's championing in terms of having more international inflows and these kind of things because they have recently been put out of the grey list by the end of 2021. Clearly, this can serve as an inspiration, but we need to take into consideration that countries like Botswana and Mauritius, they are considerably smaller and less complex than South Africa. But yes, everything that I'm saying here, we foresee that this is going to be the case, and we see a clear link to the field of the organization where I work in, that is specialized in illicit trade and financial flows, that when we have these problems, the economic prospects of a country, they are severely undermined, and this creates a big problem for the society because there are less genuine income for the parts of the society that need it the most. So, though it's difficult to assess in clear numbers what's the impact, this has a negative impact. Let's be honest. This is the case. The best thing that South Africa can do is to comply with the standards to improve this.
I would still like to go back to the issue of when you talked about the strengthening of investigations and prosecutions, and of course the ensuring of authorities producing timely access and accurate, up-to-date, beneficial ownership information to assist with investigation and nipping nefarious financial atrocities in the bud. Now, partly you mentioned what the National Treasury and Central Bank needs to do, but then let's look at those institutions, including the regulators, in terms of implementing the necessary changes to address the FATF's concerns. What are the critical roles that they should play to assist in that regards?
Well, I briefly talk about it. There is something very important that all the authorities and the regulators that they are involved need to do, and this is key for fulfilling the FATF requirements, which is following the risk-based approach that the recommendations of the FATF put forward. What is this risk-based approach? Well, it means that countries, in all countries, all the competent authorities, including banks, and all other operators that deal with assets and other financial institutions, as well as non-financial designated entities, as could be lawyers, they are deeply familiarized with and that they understand the risks of money laundering and terrorist financing. These are things that can be related to know your customer, know how you do your business, due diligence, and this is something that not only the authorities but also private entities need to be aware of. And this is one of the biggest challenges of the FATF and how it's implemented in every country, given the complexity of the new societies, given the complexity of the economy, given what we are having now, what has to do with virtual assets. I mean, it's a constant work. And I think that this is the things that we need to look at. And this is a real challenge that South Africa is grappling with. The reason why it could be difficult to get out of the grey list in 2025. But yeah, this needs to be done. This is the core thing that needs to be looked at, namely the risk-based approach that the FATF proposes.
Extensively, you've spoken, Esteban, about what South Africa needs to do to deal with these issues. But then I'd like to also find out from you, because of course it was raised that South Africa lacks the willpower to deliver these particular necessities that are needed in terms of the requirements as being postulated by the task force. Now, how do you think that the South African government can separate the issue of politics and individualism and the need to protect probably statesmen or those who are influential in the country from issues of graft and corruption, and having to decisively stamp out corruption and, of course, put an end to these issues of terrorism financing and, of course, money laundering in the country?
Well, thank you. That's a very easy question to answer. I mean, answering this question, it's something that goes on in many countries. I mean, how to deal with corruption, how to find the difference. I mean, I'm going to repeat this. My specialization is on financial crimes and international law, international standards. And to me, a good way to fight corruption is using the tools that we have in place. If you see the FATF standards, they promote the implementation of the Palermo Convention, which is the convention of the UN to fight transnational organized crime, and the UN Convention to fight corruption globally. Okay, what is this? These are the standards that all countries have agreed upon to implement international laws to be able to fight this. And this includes mutual legal assistance between countries, extradition laws, standardizing the laws, so we can have dual criminality in different countries. And we are seeing that everyone has the same priorities because this type of crimes, they are intrinsically international. Now, having said that, I think that if the specialists and technicians focus on delivering what needs to be delivered, there is a big chance that we are going to be able to tackle corruption from a technical perspective. Of course, there is another aspect which is very important, but it's not under the field of my expertise, that has to do with political commitment, convincing people, finding partnerships, etc., etc. But that's something that it's on the realm of politics and political studies. But
let me quickly
everything that is technical, yeah, I think that needs to be implemented, and it's a good way to combat this. Sorry.
Okay, Esteban, let me just quickly pull up, and I'd like my producer to also pull it up. The African countries that have been removed from the grey list, they include Botswana, Mauritius, Morocco, and Zimbabwe. And so I'd like to find out what lessons can actually be learned from these countries that you think that other countries like South Africa, as you've mentioned, Burkina Faso, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, Mali, Mozambique, and some other African countries can make do with to actually help them also get off the grey list, because I know that it places a bit of embargo on their on the kind of assistance they're able to get from international institutions and the way they're being perceived by, of course, the global community.
Yes, I think that it would be interesting to focus, if you allow me here, especially in Botswana and Mauritius. Why? Because they are part of the same style regional body of the FATF as South Africa, namely the Eastern and Southern Africa Anti-Money Laundering Group, which is a regional body organization that works in cooperation with the FATF. And these two countries, Botswana and Mauritius, they are under the purview of this same body as South Africa. I mean, just as a caveat, if we see the GDP of Botswana and Mauritius, it's around 10 to 18 billion dollars, whereas South Africa's GDP, if I'm not wrong, it's around 420 billion. This is for the years 2021. So we need to take into consideration that there is a big difference in terms of the complexity of the countries. But there are some good lessons that can be taken into account. I briefly mentioned that for Botswana, it was somehow, if you want, let me say, into quotations, easier to get out of the grey list because they have problems mostly related to the robustness, so they have to modify their laws. But when it comes to Mauritius, it's interesting to see that it's one of the countries that fully complies with the 40 recommendations of the FATF, and this is giving the country good economic prospects. And probably a good lesson learned from that, and something that South Africa could leverage on, is partnering with a country like this in terms of financial flows, because it's going to be easier to adopt this kind of tradition and to assimilate to this kind of tradition. And the lessons that they can be learned is that it's important to work directly with the regional body that I mentioned. And the other big lesson learned is that it's going to help the country to improve the economic prospects. So I think that they need to go the way. I think that this is in the pipeline. Normally, for a country to get out of the grey list, it takes 1 to 3 years. And I think that probably we are being a little bit too anxious about it, because this gray listing was from February 2023. Well, it's 8 months since that happened. I mean, it's still, we are in the average period. And I understand that there are other connotations that they are here. I'm aware of the statements that have been done, but I'm not completely familiarized with the background and the reason for which these things were done.
Okay.
Let's remember that recently it was a BRICS, so there are many things that need to be taken into consideration.
Okay, now, Esteban, before I let you go, let me just quickly chip this in. I know that you're aware that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank are having their annual meetings in Marrakesh in Morocco. And of course, the focus, most especially for Africa, has to do with building capacity for Africa's economic empowerment amidst compound shocks. And earlier on, during the live feeds that we broadcast, we saw part of the speakers talking about the macroeconomic policies that are needed for the sub-Saharan African region to help develop its economy. So I just quickly want to find out from you, looking at those policies, macroeconomic policies, what do you think they should be, and how do you think that these world institutions can come into play or come into place to help Sub-Sahara develop its economy? Of course, we know that there are economic shocks that's happening globally, but then it's having a huge attendant effect on on Africa's economy. And of course, there are also domestic issues, of course, that Africa is dealing with. But if we're able to have these policies in place, it might just help insulate the continent's economy from these shocks and give it a bit of growth. So I'd like to find out from you what policies you are expecting from the IMF and the World Bank.
Yes, well, normally the policies that they are proposed in general terms, let me get here directly to my field of expertise and the one of my organization, which is fighting illicit trade, everything that has to do with the gray economy. And what we see is that the big challenge that developing countries or even emerging markets like the South African and the BRICS one is fighting against informality, which is deeply related with financial crimes. It's related with money laundering, because whenever there is a big market that is non-registered, money laundering happens and terrorist financing can happen. And these organizations, the IMF and the World Bank, they always strive with the countries to formalize the economy. You can do a parallel here with Latin America, between Africa and Latin America. It's one of the big challenges. And I think that the policies that need to be put in place by governments is facilitating the registration of the economy. What do I mean with this? Well, we have seen in many sectors where there is illicit trade, for instance, meaning gray economy or non-registered economy, that in sectors like alcohol or let's say tobacco, there might be a correlation between the difficulty of commercializing those products and having those products not registered, which are basically when everything that happens in the gray economy, it's mostly controlled by organized crime. In South Africa, we have a clear example of what happened during the pandemic, that there were restriction laws for alcohol and tobacco, and this created a spike in organized crime and illicit trade in these fields. So I think that we should integrate the voices of these international organizations, governmental organizations and bodies like the Financial Action Task Force, like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, in the sense that they all promote the fighting against corruption, against criminality, and the registration of the economy, meaning that everyone who is commercializing is doing it in the registered economy and they are duly paying taxes. This is something that creates a good environment for consumers because things have a certain degree of control. And to do this, it's important to implement wise policies, which, to my understanding, the most important one is facilitating the availability and affordability of genuine products to the consumer in whichever field you want to discuss. So I think that these are the most important economic measures that need to be taken.
Esteban Guidici, Senior Policy Advisor, Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade. Thank you so much for talking to us. It's been a robust session and engagement with you. We appreciate that.
Me too. Thank you. Nice discussing with you.
Of course.